What's up, guys? Welcome to part 4 in this series, Understanding Wokeness. I am Hovik Arshaguni. In today's part, I think we're finally going to get somewhere interesting. We're going to be talking about the birth of critical queer theory and understand the fusion of the postmodernist philosophers, the philosophy, with a political and activist goal, a political goal. First, though, let's summarize where we've been. So in part 1, we discussed some of the symptoms of things happening out in the world, cancel culture and other things that I claim have their roots in wokeness and postmodernism. In parts 2 and 3, we dove deep into the early postmodernist philosophers, and we viewed how what they believed, what they contended, was striking at the very root of reason, of the birth of the Enlightenment and everything that has led to our modern society. So let's just summarize how these postmodernists viewed the world. It goes like this. Power is pulsing from the heart and from every element, every person, every idea, every institution in society. Humans born into this power structure, into this society, are blank slates. There is no scientific truth that explains what humans are, whether through biology or through evolutionary study. Humans are complete blank slates. Everything they believe, every way in which they behave, is 100% a product of that society, because humans are born as blank slates and society inscribes its propaganda onto these human brains, and they go out and they reenact and they re-perpetuate this power. They have no choice. This is how they view the world, and so everyone is corrupted by this power or oppressed by it. So when they view the world in this way, in which literally everything must be unmasked and its deep power imbalance and oppressive violence be put on full display for the world, it has a link between that belief and their desire to tear things down, things that normally we don't see as contaminated with this oppressive power dynamic. I just wanted to summarize that so that we know where we're starting from. Because the critical queer theorists who gave birth to this field, critical queer theory, took this postmodern philosophy, used it as their foundational worldview, and went on to try to explain matters of sex, of biology, of gender, of sexual orientation, in terms of looking at the world through this way. They were very much inspired by these people. And if you think about how the postmodernists viewed the world, it's not that much different how the critical queer theorists viewed sex, because they just applied that thinking to these topics. So when we talk about sex, male, female, or gender, masculine, feminine, or sexual orientation, gay, straight, lesbian, and on, the critical queer theorists look at all of that categorization. It is oppressively violent that you want to distinguish between male and female, or between gay and straight. And the fact that you desire to do so is only a result of you being propagandized and brainwashed by the system. The system has taught you that male and female are distinct. The system has taught you that straight or gay are different categories. But these categories don't exist for the postmodernists and for these critical queer theorists. And they only exist because society has socialized you and conscripted you into this way of viewing the world. But in reality, there is zero truth claim, at least according to them, about these various categories or sexual distinctions, etc. And critical queer theory will go on to proclaim that we must problematize all discourses related to these topics. Anything that can mess them up, that can tear them down, that can make them incoherent is a solid political strategy for critical queer theorists. In fact, all of these ideas are 100% socially constructed. What that means is all of our conceptions, who we're attracted to and who we're not, the different, male or female, all of these things regarding sex or gender that seem to emanate from these two poles of masculine and feminine or male and female are all socially constructed, meaning society teaches us to construct them. There is nothing deeper there. There's nothing biological there. There's nothing that is not arbitrary there. And in fact, if these power structures didn't exist, we could imagine a society without sex, without gender, without sexual orientation. Because the very idea of categorizing is the power dynamics at play. That's how they view sex, gender, sexuality, all of these topics. And the point is not that there isn't some social construction or even a majority. Their point is that there is zero biology at play. So it's a radical social constructionist take. There is no such thing as biology having a hand in these things. Now, so far we haven't said anything necessarily interesting. We've just applied what we learned about the postmodernists to these topics of sex, gender, sexuality, sexual orientation. What makes the critical queer theorists interesting is that they were the first to apply this pure form of postmodernism for explicitly political means. In their view, for liberation for people. Let's take this acronym, LGBTQ. What is the L? Fairly straightforward. What is the G? People have an idea, they understand what these things mean. G, gay, a man who is attracted to other men. B, a bisexual. T, transgender. What is Q? What is queer? Is queer a different category altogether? Is queer, can you be gay and queer? Can you be straight and queer? How does this thing Q play in with all the rest? What does it mean to be queer? And we're going to learn that queer is actually a nonsensical definition that has arisen from this way of looking at the world, that is in conflict not only with heteronormativity, but also these other letters, LGBT. You can't strictly define LGBT and categorize people in this way. Queerness is the perspective that says we need to tear down all semblance of any structure because there is no reality here. The Q is actually in conflict with the LGBT. And in fact, we'll see later, they like to use this incoherence as a political means, meaning we don't have to make it make sense. This concept of queer has gotten so popular that even to queer something has become a term that they use in their literature. And it's expanded vastly beyond these topics of sexuality. They have papers where they queer space-time. We need to get rid of the concept of space-time. We need to queer economic analysis. To queer something is to make it incoherent, to try to tear it down and say, this is propaganda, it's oppressive, violent, it's bad. I'm going to start with a quote by Michel Foucault, because we've talked about him earlier. He was one of the postmodern philosophers. And I want to really drive home the link between the early postmodernists and the later queer thinkers that came along. The society that emerged in the 19th century, bourgeois, capitalist, or industrial society, call it what you will, did not confront sex with a fundamental refusal of recognition. On the contrary, it put into operation an entire machinery for producing true discourses concerning it. True in quotes. He didn't believe that these were true discourses. But what he's saying is, our society has constructed a vast operating machine structure to create false discourses to lead us to categorize people and think of sex and sexuality in a certain way. There is no truth in them. Now we're going to talk about some of these godmothers of critical queer theory. So let's start with Gayle Rubin. She writes, "It is impossible to think with any clarity about the politics of race or gender as long as these are thought of as biological entities rather than social constructs. Similarly, sexuality is impervious to political analysis as long as it is primarily conceived as a biological phenomenon or an aspect of individual psychology." What she's saying here is quite cynical. She said, as long as these ideas are based in the truth of biology, they're impervious to our analysis. We can't get at them to tear them down because there's the wall of science blocking us from, there's scientists saying this is how the world works. We can't reach over and crush these various categories. And in fact, it's very cynical what she's saying. She's saying for our politics, for our agenda, we don't care if these are true. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It doesn't help our politics. We're going to march forward as if they're not true because that makes it easier to politicize. Judith Butler is another of these early thinkers in critical queer theory, and she said that all of gender is a performance. When people act feminine or masculine, they are merely performing. There is no expression here of some underlying biological feeling. It is all sort of like an act, and it's done unconsciously because since a young age, society has been pushing us into male or female, blue or pink balloon, and therefore it compounds and it grows, and people grow into these adults that express different genders, but there's nothing real there. There's no biology there. This is just a performance. She called it gender performativity. And because it was a performance, because it had no truth value in them, the goal was to mess with these ideas, to mess with these performances, to queer them. She writes here, "The politics of parody, a subversive and parodic redeployment of power, a subversive and parody-based re-understanding, reimagining of this power, this oppressive power." So we're starting to see how we're growing from just the how to view the world phase into how to behave in the world, what to do to tear down these power structures. And from the politics of parody comes gender fucking, defined as the conscious effort to subvert traditional notions of gender identity and gender roles through the employment of drag or the queer aesthetic. Anything that goes against the norm here is viewed as good, and anything that is the norm is viewed as bad. And we can see elements of this in our modern culture. A mother that wants to stay at home with her children is ridiculed by modern day third wave feminists or queer thinkers. They're ridiculed because they're falling into traditional gender norms. Anything that messes with this, it's not about the freedom of the individual, because most people say, let people do what they want. Go live your life how you want. But the politics of queer theory say anything that goes against the grain is absolutely good, because it's going against the grain of false categorical constructs. Finally, we come to Eve Sedgwick, who is really the most devastating of these early thinkers, because she admits that it makes very little sense to come up with the politics in this way. It makes very little sense to, if you think of the world in this way, you're going to run into so many contradictions. And she says the contradictions are good. The contradictions are fine. Their incoherence is useful for us. In consonance with my emphasis on the performative relations of double and conflicted definition, the theorized prescription for a practical politics implicit in these readings is for a multi-pronged movement whose idealist and materialist impulses, whose minority model and universalist model strategies, and for that matter whose gender separatist and gender integrative analyses, would likewise proceed in parallel without any high premium placed on ideological rationalization between them. So here Sedgwick is saying, well, we've emerged in this era where there are already some ideas and discourses at play. Gay politics is making headway. Homosexuality, for example, is already changing. It may have been looked at as a disorder before or as some sort of sin in the Christian sense, but our liberal society is beginning to understand this and saying these are 100% normal people. It's something that happens naturally. It's innate to some extent. It can't be changed. It's not a choice. This discourse was already happening, making homosexuality more acceptable in the modern world. And Sedgwick is saying, yeah, we understand they're making this argument on some sort of biological or innate basis and they're actually making progress. We're still going to latch on to this. It's okay that they're minoritizing the view that homosexuals are a minority, but of course still deserve rights, human freedoms, etc. Nothing wrong with them. With the universalizing view, which says everything is a spectrum: sex, gender, sexual orientation, choose your gender, do whatever you want. There is nothing real there. We understand these are incompatible. We don't place a high premium on trying to rationalize between them. This is fascinating. It's fascinating. It's like a guerrilla warfare of ideas. It's extraordinary. They're saying it's easier for their politics to have an incoherent idea about what they're doing. It's easier if they have so many ideas, they don't fully believe in one, they're really committed to the idea that nothing exists and everything is a spectrum, but they're latching on to these other gay advancement movements or the movements in the past 50 years to understand sexuality and their variances better. It's okay if we latch on to these. It's okay if it doesn't make sense. This will make our politics easier. It will make it harder to criticize. If you criticize it, they can dodge and say, no, we believe this, not that. And if you criticize this, they can dodge again. It's like a guerrilla warfare on the ideas level, explicitly undertaken by one of the early critical queer theorists in order to advance their political agenda, which believes that there is no such thing as sex, gender, sexual orientation, and they're all socially constructed. I want to drive the point home with this guerrilla warfare idea. Biology is almost never brought up in this literature unless it's brought up to say how biological research is a problem. It's a problem that messes with our political agenda. But if it supports our agenda, they do use elements of truth. So they do use elements of biological research and findings in the narrow ways that it supports their dogmatic conclusions. We don't need this framework. We don't need it because we've made great progress. And if you're truly a liberal, if you're truly a progressive, if you truly believe in freedom and equality, you can say, do what you want. Be how you want. Express yourself how you want. You do you. I don't want to rule over you and tell you how to live. But we don't need to ignore biological truth. We don't need this nonsense of throwing out science in order to allow every individual and every human being to live a long, prosperous, fulfilled life in the ways in which they see fit for themselves. And sort of the last point I want to make, they're admitting that they have a political agenda and they're ignoring truth in order to serve this political agenda. They're very interested in having all of society accept the truth that trans women, people who were born male, are women. They're very obsessed with having us all agree that this makes sense. If someone is born male and they feel like they're in the wrong body, go ahead, do whatever you want to your body, live how you want. Why do we need to cede linguistic ground to this ideology? Why do we have to deconstruct? It's rife with contradictions. They really want some men who choose to belong to the category of women, but when you look deeper and say, how are you defining this category of women? It disappears. There's nothing there. So why be so obsessed with this categorization if you can't define it? I think I've said enough. I think when you absorb this, you'll begin to understand that what we're seeing are just some wedge issues, but really the interest is in deconstructing all of these, and everyone can go choose for themselves which view has more validity. And you need to choose two things. One, is sex a spectrum? Is sex in any way correlated to gender? Or can you just choose your sex? And can you choose your gender? And can you choose your sexual orientation? Can you be homosexual on Mondays and Wednesdays and be straight the rest of the week? Can you be bisexual on Friday afternoons? Can you change these at will? Can you be a male for breakfast and a female for dinner? That's really what we're talking about here. That these are just labels we can apply and deconstruct at will because they mean nothing. You choose whether biology tells us anything about the way the world works, about ourselves, something about ourselves, how we feel. You choose if you're attracted to a particular sex, if that is just a social construct that the system taught you, that you could have been born in another society and been attracted to the other sex. You choose that for yourself. What is not to be chosen, though, is that we can claim equality for all, freedom for all, aversion of bigotry for all, and not oppress people without giving up biological truths, without giving up science and our need to understand how the world works, how we work, the evolutionary history that we came from. We can stay true to valid scientific ideas and at the same time say, anyone who doesn't fit in these neatly, anyone who feels different, anyone who doesn't even want to accept them can live a free life. The way they win is that they marry the two. In order to really not oppress people, you have to throw away everything that science tells you. False. I reject that, and I hope that you can reject it as well. Because the more we deny who we are and where we come from, and we might be wrong about some of our ideas now, but the more we deny it, the more we stop even looking into it to understand it with more clarity, the more trouble it will lead for society. And we're seeing it now. So, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Send me questions. I know it was a long time since I put this video. Send me questions and take care.